Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time to see what's making the headlines then with the political editors of The Sun and The Guardian, Harry Cole and Pippa Crerar. Welcome to both of you. With us from now until just before midnight. So to the front pages then, let us kick off with The Express and the issue of cyber hacking by China against the UK's democracy on the front of quite a few of tomorrow's papers, including the Daily Express with the headline, "The Tory MPs warning about the threat from China." On the front page of the UK cabinet clash on how to fight China, spy threat. And the headline on the front of the Times, China set to be declared a national security threat. Well, The Guardian leading on the latest in the war in Gaza. Israel isolated, the paper says, after UN Security Council demands a ceasefire. The Financial Times reporting that the chief executive and chairman of Boeing are to resign amid intense scrutiny of the aircraft maker. It follows an incident, of course, where a jet's door fell off mid-flight. A 74-year-old woman has been arrested after a 5-year-old girl and her mother were struck and killed in Plymouth. That is the lead for the Metro. The Sun on the Princess of Wales and how her cancer announcement has potentially saved lives by inspiring thousands to get checked. And what they're calling slightly disturbing news from the Star. Don't panic, but vampires and zombies do walk among us. What is that picture of? Is that a bat?
Not entirely sure.
Not quite sure. We will analyse. Come back to you. Don't forget, scan the QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme. Check out the front pages for yourself. Listen to our guests. So let's go to them. Harry Cole and Pippa Crerar, welcome to both of you. So China, spy threat, it's all over the papers, isn't it? Including in the Eye, Harry, which talks about a UK cabinet clash on how to deal with this.
Yeah, I can't say the government are entirely united on this one. The incident that happened actually happened a couple of years ago. So the obvious question is, why has it taken this long for the blame to be apportioned to China? Yes, obviously the Treasury and the Foreign Office have a long record of not wanting to upset the Chinese government. This has been done, like so many things we do now, sort of almost in lockstep and conjunction with the United States. And it almost feels like, actually, I think it's less of a cabinet row and actually more we were sort of waiting for permission from Biden to reveal what has happened in our own country, which doesn't sit quite right with me. Yes, there are different agreements around the cabinet table about how far to go, but I think that might necessarily be more institutions than personalities. The Treasury obviously pushing for a much softer line and trying to don't upset the investment, don't upset the people that own vast amounts of our infrastructure, and rely on for money, whereas actually the Home Office and security services are obviously much hotter on the threat, and they're the ones dealing with the brunt of it. Yes,
there was certainly a sense that we are in lockstep with our allies in terms of the timing on this one, isn't there? But the Daily Mail picking up on this fury at feeble rebuke to China. Certainly this is being driven by a few MPs, and it was against some MPs and indeed the Electoral Commission that this cyber attack was supposed to have taken place.
Yeah, the Mail, along with some of the other papers, is going with the response from the so-called China hawks on the Conservative backbenchers. Most notable amongst those, of course, is the former Tory leader Ian Duncan-Smith, who's a long-standing critic of Beijing. He was one of the 4 politicians who were targeted by a spear phishing attack, which we're told was not successful. It was blocked by Parliament's security system. But there was a press conference earlier today in which Ian Duncan-Smith, Stuart MacDonald, the SNP MP, and Tim Loughton, a former Tory minister, who are all members of an international parliamentary group, which is trying to hold China to account, suggested they basically called on the government to take a tougher approach. They don't think that it's A, been tough enough, and B, quick enough. I mean, as Harry says, the Electoral Commission attack was 21-22, and the spear phishing attempt on the MPs was in 1922, a very long time ago, in 2022.
Yeah.
So it's a couple of years, and this actually came up in the Commons later with these MPs and others suggesting that they should have got a move on. I was very struck by some of the language that Ian Duncan-Smith used, likening the UK's response to an elephant giving birth to a mouse, while MacDonald accused ministers of turning up at a gunfight with a wooden spoon.
But should we be surprised about any of this, or indeed from Russia, which has long been the suspicion? Is this the new form of spying? What is the intention of these nations? Do we name them as bad actors? Do we name them as threats, which is what some of the papers are saying.
So when the Electoral Commission, when they finally coughed to the Electoral Commission thing initially saying that it had been attacked, it was by a hostile actor, and it was, it was only really sort of 3 or 4 people, 3 or 4 countries spring to mind when they go that far to say, is it Iran, is it North Korea, is it China, or is it Russia? And we've got a piece tomorrow from the, we've been having a chat with the NCSC, which is the sort of front line of our security services fight against it. And they're saying, look, it's 24/7. This is the sort of very tip of the iceberg in terms of the threat we're doing. And actually, they're saying, look, not only are we fighting this, but we need your help to fight it too. Politicians need to, improve their sort of digital hygiene, if that makes sense, improve their security, and don't be lax, because if it's not China, someone else is going to be attacking you.
I mean, the corporate world is very alert to it, to be
Absolutely.
fair, is it not? I mean, I'm sure
it is, but there are
well.
weaknesses. There are always weaknesses in the system, and those weaknesses are always being probed. What I thought was interesting, though, in the United States' version of events this morning, this afternoon, they said 43 British politicians were targeted, whereas in the Commons they only talked about 4. So there's some questions there to answer. But it's clear that there is a very anti-China group on the Tory benches, as Pippa said, led by Ian Duncan Smith. But what I thought was really interesting today was actually you had the SNP and Labour coming into that as well. So Cavan Jones, a former Defence Minister on the Labour side, Stuart MacDonald, who speaks for Defence for the SNP, they were really going hard on it. So actually, you've got another sort of alliance forming in Parliament, cross-party alliance, that's leaving the government looking a little, as the Mail say, feeble. And
we have a story as well in tomorrow's Guardian about Labour warning China that it would act against interference in UK democracy if it wins the next election. Catherine West, who's the Shadow Asia Minister, has just got back from a trip to Beijing where, for the first time, there was a public meeting between the opposition and the Chinese government. So, given the likely outcome, as it looks right now, of the next election, or possible outcome of the next election, it's also worth us keeping an eye on Labour and what they would do in government when faced with a similar threat.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Daily Express talks about we must now label China a threat to Britain. The problem is, and it's a case in point with Russia too, an over-reliance on the goods that they provide for us. In the case of Russia, obviously, energy. In the case of China, we've effectively got rid of our manufacturing sector to the point where we import so much stuff from China. So what do we do about those goods and services and energy infrastructure we bring in from
That's why they're sort of almost dancing on a head of a pin about this, because Rishi Sunak has got this turn of phrase which is epoch-defining, what was it, defining threat, or the biggest threat to our economy. They won't just say China is a threat. And if you think what
epoch-defining challenge.
That was an epoch-defining challenge. That was it.
That's why you want to get
this is a country that's absolutely messing with Hong Kong. Still hasn't given an honest answer and justification or explanation for how they managed to kill millions of people around the world with COVID. What really went on in the early days of that? They are locking up their people, by the tens of thousands, and are there human rights abuses? We could sit here all day and name them. What does it actually take before actually the British government will actually wake up to that fact? And it feels to me like they're just, the pressure is growing.
Or consumers, or us.
Yeah, no, totally.
You look at everything you purchase and...
I totally agree.
Interesting. To move on to another, geopolitical global issue, which is leading your paper, The Guardian. It's the Israel-Hamas war and, the seismic events at the UN Security Council finally... obviously a non-veto from the US led to a ceasefire demand being passed now, and what it means now, what the potential is now. Yeah,
well, I mean, it's a huge moment really when you consider that there have been several occasions at the UN Security Council where they've attempted to get, call
for a ceasefire.
Yes, and it's been blocked. And then at the end of last week, Russia and China blocked a US another attempt to have a call for a ceasefire because it explicitly linked that with the release of the remaining Israeli hostages that are being held by Hamas in Gaza. And there was a feeling amongst not just the other UN Security Council members, but also the 10 non-permanent members of the Security Council, that by linking the two so closely, you basically were when we were at a crisis point in Gaza, both in the north with famine and in the south with a possible attack on Rafah, which obviously the US opposes as well, that you were giving Israel an opportunity to continue the fighting. There's no sort of opportunity to sort of call for an end to it. And then over the weekend, those 10 members drew up their own form of words, which the US decided that it wouldn't veto, it wouldn't block, meaning that because they abstained, and of course Britain supported it as well, it means that they've now finally come up with a UN resolution which makes Israel, I think, look increasingly isolated, not in its response to the initial attack, but in its handling of the war subsequently. And I think that's the important distinction here as far as the United Nations is concerned.
The fear that Israel always had was at the end of the day, that's why they're so hardline on these things, because they know at the end of the day, they are alone. Even when the going gets tough and the president of the US has a re-election this year, they abandon their so-called allies. And that's what's happened today. You've got Biden being pulled to the left by his party, who he's very concerned are going to come for him at the DNC convention and try and replace him. So he's putting domestic politics for himself before the international order, and that's basically what's happened.
Well, actually, Donald Trump did an interview today as well, in which he called out, and he's an ally of Netanyahu, the Israeli president, Israeli prime minister, and he made it clear that he felt that it was time for Israel to bring an end to the fighting in Gaza as well. So it's not just about the Democrats doing that.
The problem is, though, is unless there is a direct link between the hostages, all of the hostages, not the 40 hostages that are currently being on the table in some sort of smoke-filled room behind the scenes, unless all of the hostages, and Hamas have been actually unable to say how many are even still alive, unless they are all being taken into consideration, it does feel to me like they're being left high and dry here. Because what incentive does there possibly for Hamas to come to the table to actually respect any ceasefire if they're not able, if they think they can get away with this? And
that was certainly Israel's line.
Yeah, totally.
Watching Netanyahu is fascinating. He's obviously pulled this delegation, which was going to Washington, partly to talk about Rafah. The US is putting pressure, obviously, on Israel not to go into Rafah, where it's thought, so many people have moved, more than 1 million people, and presumably the hostages are there as well, are they not? I mean, you would presume they might be.
Lord Cameron put out this sort of incredibly wishy-washy statement earlier tonight about how, all of these wonderful requests, that what this great UN resolution means, that Hamas must no longer be in control of... must no longer be in control of Gaza. All the hostages must be released, and it's just pie in the sky. If that was ever going to happen, that would have happened already.
Well, I think the point is, though, that it reached the stage that so many people had died. The situation on the ground in Gaza is so extreme, and despite the fact that, of course, those original attacks were horrific, it's reached the point that people feel that this response is now disproportionate, regardless of understanding and having sympathy with Israel and its need to protect itself. And that's why pretty much the entire global community at the UN, with the sort of tacit, I suppose, support of the US, though they do say that their position hasn't shifted, has resulted in this resolution. Now, the key thing now, I think, is going to be to see whether actually that has any impact on the ground.
OK, we will certainly see, and certainly Israel will not agree with that global assessment, or many in Israel. So lots more still to come, including farmers bring their protests over cheap food imports to Westminster. That and more after the break. Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview, joined once again with, or by even, Harry Cole and Pippa Crerar. Get my language right. Let's talk tractors. Doesn't always happen, to be fair. Front page of a number of newspapers, not surprising. Finally, the farmers' protests coming to the UK, or to Westminster at least. We've seen them everywhere. In fact, the farmers' leaders lamenting the loss of the French because they normally protest for them. But this is about poorer standards and cheap imports, which can even, they say, be passed off as food from the UK. It
was incredibly noisy just about 5 o'clock as it's sort of the helicopter flew over and we thought, oh, that must be Rishi getting back. But no, it was actually the cameras, where this convoy turned up, and they were I think Gordon Rayner in the Telegraph tomorrow has it. They were blasting out Barbie Girl, the theme from Beverly Hills Cop, and various other things. It was slightly surreal because it was being a bit more sort of violent in Belgium and in France with these protests. There's been sort of setting fire to things and they've been setting fire to bins and things. Where this is actually...
Yeah, even in Poland, destroying Ukrainian grain. I mean,
this was a bit more British in its thing. Look, they're angry about imports. They're basically saying, look, farmers are being forgotten.
Yeah. There's no food plan.
There's no food plan, food security, exactly. And actually, if you take away the bread basket of Britain, then, you will be entirely relying on imports. They're upset that, free trade, tariff-free deals with the EU, with places like New Zealand on things like lamb, have upset people. But also, I think there's just it's just a bit of a howl of frustration. And I think they've seen what's gone on in Europe and thought we'll have a bit of that.
OK, let's move on to The Guardian. The story that your paper's led on, obviously. The latest on the Garrick Club, which is the men's-only club, obviously. Yeah?
Yes, and after a series of high-profile individuals in public life who were revealed to be members deciding that, in fact, that probably wasn't the best of ideas, including Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, and the Chief of MI6, the latest development is that 4 senior judges have quit the men-only Garrick. The Judicial Office has announced this, and this is obviously against the backdrop of men in the legal profession coming under quite a lot of pressure from some of their female peers for their close association with an organisation which has repeatedly blocked attempts by women to join. So
you can go, and you can't pay for anything.
It's funny that the people were fine with it until their names were in the paper. That's the slightly thing.
Protesting from the inside.
Are you a member?
I'm not a member. But now there's so many vacancies.
Right.
Maybe they'll let me in.
Harry's a member elsewhere at a private members club.
Which is mixed. Thank you.
Oh, really? Oh, is it? More on that to come, obviously. Harry Cole, Pippa Crerar, for now. Thank you very much indeed.